The rain had begun in slow whispering drizzles that morning, but by late afternoon it fell in dense silver sheets shrouding the desert town of Sedona. Lucas Harrington drove with his jaw tight and his hands clenched around the steering wheel, his black SUV slicing through the storm like a ship lost at sea. Beside him, in the child seat, sat Noah, his 6-year-old son, silent as always, watching the water chase itself down the window pane. Lucas had always loved the rain once before his world fractured and before silence became the language of his home. Now, rain only reminded him of all the things he could not fix. He glanced at Noah, who had pulled his knees up under his jacket, his small body curling in on itself in a way that Lucas knew too well. Noah wasn't afraid of storms. He was afraid of places, sounds, people, things Lucas couldn't shield him from no matter how hard he tried. When the low fuel light blinked on, Lucas turned off the main road and found a small battered diner blinking like a beacon through the rain. The parking lot was half flooded. A crooked neon sign above the building sputtered between flickering letters, but it was open. That was enough. He pulled into a spot near the door and killed the engine. For a moment he sat there feeling the weight of exhaustion in every bone. Then he unbuckled Noah, lifting the boy into his arms. Noah clung to him, his thin arms tightening around Lucas's neck as they dashed through the downpour into the warmth of the diner. The bell above the door gave a half-hearted jingle. Inside, the diner smelled of coffee and frying bacon, a blend of comfort and fatigue. A few locals hunched over mugs, the kind of regulars who had seen everything and learned to mind their own business. Lucas found an empty booth near the window, set Noah gently down on one side, and slid in across from him. Noah rocked lightly on the seat, his head turned away from the room, focusing on the patterns the raindrops made on the glass. Lucas spoke, softly, knowing it was more for himself than for the boy who rarely responded. "It's just for a little while, buddy. Then we'll go home." A young waitress approached with a coffee pot in hand, her smile quick but kind. She wore jeans under her apron, her hair pulled up into a messy bun that somehow suited the rain-slicked world outside. Her name tag said Ruby. "Evening," she said, her voice warm and easy. "Rough weather, huh?" Lucas gave a curt nod. He ordered grilled cheese for Noah and a black coffee for himself, avoiding small talk the way he always did. People meant questions. Questions led to pity or judgment. Lucas had no patience for either. He barely noticed Ruby disappear toward the kitchen, until a sharp crash shattered the diner's murmur. A tray of dishes clattered to the floor, sharp as a gunshot. The world tilted. Not for Lucas, but for Noah. The boy flinched, his face twisting, a low keening sound escaping his lips. Before Lucas could move, Noah bolted, sliding out of the booth and crumpling to the floor in a ball of panic and fear. Lucas shoved back his chair, heart hammering. He knelt, reaching for Noah, murmuring soothing nonsense, but his touch only seemed to agitate the boy more. Lucas felt the familiar sting of helplessness, the kind that knotted in his gut and crawled up his spine. Then Ruby was there. Without hesitation. She crouched beside them, moving with a patience so gentle it almost hurt to watch. She didn't touch Noah. She didn't make sudden noises. She simply pulled a laminated card from the pocket of her apron and held it out. It showed a simple cartoon face breathing deeply, the word "safe" written underneath. Lucas watched, stunned, as Noah blinked through his tears and stared at the card. Ruby placed her hand flat against her own chest, exaggerated a deep breath in and out, then tapped the card softly. "Safe," she said again, her voice like a thread pulling Noah back from wherever fear had taken him. Noah's small chest heaved in imitation, his body trembling, but the panic receding. Lucas should have thanked her, should have fallen over himself, with gratitude. Instead, anger, sharp, shameful, blinding, surged through him. "What do you think you're doing?" he barked, voice slicing the heavy air. Ruby startled but didn't rise. She stayed where she was, level with Noah, unflinching. "I'm helping," she said simply. "You don't know us," Lucas snapped, feeling the familiar rush of defensive pride. "You don't get to decide what's best for my son." Ruby's gaze met his, steady and unapologetic. "I wasn't deciding anything," she said softly. "I was listening. Maybe you should try it." The words hit harder than any shouted insult. Lucas stared at her, fury and shame warring inside him. Around them, the diner had fallen silent, all eyes averted, but all ears keenly tuned to the unfolding drama. Noah, oblivious to the tension, was now sitting up, his hands tracing slow, deliberate circles on the table leg, his breathing still uneven but calmer. Lucas gathered his son in his arms, standing stiffly. Without another word, He threw a crumpled 20 onto the table and stalked out into the storm. The rain hit them like a wall, cold and unrelenting. Lucas strapped Noah into the car with fumbling fingers, his heart a drumbeat of anger he couldn't aim at anyone but himself. As they pulled away, Lucas caught a glimpse of Ruby through the rain-blurred window. She had picked up the laminated card, wiping it carefully with the sleeve of her apron, her expression unreadable. Noah, silent in the back seat, pressed his forehead to the glass, watching the diner fade into the mist. Lucas drove through the storm, through the guilt clawing at his throat, through the echo of Ruby's words beating against his defenses. Listening. He hadn't realized how long it had been since someone had spoken to him without judgment, without pity, just truth, and he hated how much it hurt. In the rearview mirror, Noah's small reflection stared at the diner's fading lights until they disappeared. Lucas knew, even before he admitted it to himself, that they would be back, because sometimes even the strongest walls needed to crumble before something better could be built. And somewhere deep inside the silence they both lived with, Lucas realized that hope, fragile, battered, and stubborn, had begun to whisper again. The storm passed, overnight, leaving Sedona washed clean and shining beneath a pale morning sun. Water clung to the red rocks, the streets shimmered under puddles, and the air carried a rare sharpness, as if something new was about to break loose. But inside Lucas Harrington's home, the world remained heavy, thick with everything that hadn't been said. Lucas sat at the kitchen table, staring into a cup of black coffee gone cold. Across from him, Noah tapped 2 fingers rhythmically against the tabletop, lost somewhere in his own universe. There was a weariness in the boy today, a sagging in his small shoulders that Lucas couldn't miss. He recognized the signs because he wore the same exhaustion in his own bones. Noah was slipping away from him, inch by inch, and it terrified Lucas in a way that nothing else ever had. He hadn't slept. Not really. The events at the diner played in his mind on a loop. The crash of dishes, Noah's terror, the way Ruby had intervened with nothing but a laminated card and infinite patience. The sharp sting of her words lingered too, harder to push aside. Then Lucas wanted to admit, maybe you should try listening. Lucas didn't want to listen. He wanted to fix, to protect, to save. That's what fathers were supposed to do. But no matter how many walls he built around Noah, no matter how many battles he fought against the world outside, it didn't seem to be enough anymore. When Noah's tapping grew faster, sharper, Lucas forced himself to his feet. "Come on, buddy," he said softly, offering his hand. Noah hesitated before sliding off the chair and taking it. His fingers were cold, small, trusting without question. That trust tightened Lucas's throat until he could barely breathe. They drove. Through Sedona's sparkling streets, past the sandstone shops and the slow morning joggers. Noah stared out the window, quiet as ever. But when they neared the diner, Lucas felt it. The shift in the boy's body. The way he leaned forward, his nose almost pressed to the glass. Hope, raw and unmistakable. Lucas's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Pride roared up inside him, screaming to protect the fragile order he had built around them. It would be easier to keep driving, to turn away, to pretend that yesterday hadn't happened. But then Noah let out a small sound, not a word, not even a proper noise, just a hopeful hum that seemed to vibrate from his chest. Lucas cursed under his breath and turned the wheel. The diner looked just as worn and familiar as the day before, its neon sign blinking against the morning sun. Lucas parked the SUV and sat there for a long moment, the engine ticking as it cooled, the silence between him and Noah thick with unspoken fear and longing. "Just a minute," he muttered, more to himself than to Noah. He unbuckled and climbed out, circling around to open the door for his son. Noah slipped his hand into Lucas's, again clutching it tightly as they crossed the parking lot together. The bell above the door jingled as they entered. The same few locals hunched over their coffee, throwing barely a glance their way. Lucas scanned the diner, heart thudding painfully against his ribs. Ruby was behind the counter, wiping down a tray of coffee mugs. She looked up at the sound of the bell, her face open and unguarded for a moment until she saw them. Then her body stiffened, a wary shield snapping into place. Lucas hesitated. This was harder than he thought it would be. He cleared his throat. "Hey," he said gruffly. "I was wondering if we could talk." Ruby set down the mug she was holding, her gaze flickering between Lucas and Noah. "We?" she asked, her voice even. Noah squeezed Lucas's hand tightly, his small face anxious. Lucas swallowed hard and crouched to Noah's level. "You want to see her, buddy?" he asked softly. Noah nodded, a quick, sharp jerk of his chin. When Lucas stood again, something had shifted inside him, something fragile and enormous. "I owe you an apology," he said, forcing the words out past the "a." Pride lodged in his throat. "I overreacted. Yesterday, I was scared. I took it out on you." Ruby blinked, surprised but cautious. "And Noah?" Lucas hesitated. "He hasn't stopped thinking about you." Noah tugged on his sleeve, pointing shyly at Ruby, his fingers flapping once in a way Lucas recognized. "A request. An invitation." Ruby's face softened. She knelt down slowly, giving Noah space. She pulled another card from her apron pocket, this one showing 2 stick figures holding hands, beneath it the word friend. "Friend," she said gently, signing the word as she spoke. Noah's eyes brightened. Carefully, he mimicked the sign. Lucas's breath caught painfully. "He's been locked away so long," Lucas said, voice rough. You got through to him." Ruby stood slowly, brushing her hands on her jeans. "I just spoke his language," she said simply. "I don't know how," Lucas admitted. "I don't even know where to start." For the first time, vulnerability stripped him bare. No money, no power, no shields. Just a father desperate to do better. "I was wondering," Lucas said, forcing the words out, "if you'd consider spending some time with him. A couple afternoons, a week, just talking, teaching. Whatever you think might help." Ruby hesitated. Lucas rushed to fill the silence. "I'll pay you, whatever you want. It's not charity, it's just he needs someone. And I'm not enough." It hurt to say, but it was the truth. Ruby studied him for a long moment. Not just his words, but the way his shoulders sagged under the weight of them. The way Noah leaned toward her with cautious hope. "I'm not a therapist," she said finally. "I'm not certified. I don't care," Lucas said hoarsely. "You make him light up, that's enough." Ruby let out a slow breath. "I can come by after my shifts," she said. "We can try." Lucas's knees almost gave out with relief. "Thank you," he said, the words tasting unfamiliar but right. Ruby smiled. A small real thing, and it felt like the first ray of sunshine breaking through after a long relentless storm. Noah laughed a bright unexpected sound, and clapped his hands. The whole diner seemed to tilt in that moment, like the axis of their tiny universe had shifted just a fraction towards something better. Lucas looked at Ruby, at Noah, at hope. And for the first time in a long, long time, he allowed himself to believe they might actually find their way home. Again. The sun hung low in the Sedona sky, casting long golden shadows across the Harrington driveway. Lucas stood by the front window, his heart beating a frantic rhythm as he watched Ruby's car pull in. He didn't know why he felt so nervous. She wasn't here for him. She was here for Noah. Still, he found himself straightening his shirt, combing a hand through his hair like a boy on a first date. The soft knock at the door made Noah leap from where he had been building block towers on the living room rug. The boy nearly tripped over himself in his rush to get to the door. Lucas hurried after him, smiling despite the nervous energy curling in his chest. When he opened the door, Ruby stood there, casual in jeans and a simple green t-shirt, her messy bun barely containing the wild waves of her hair. She held a canvas tote bag slung over one shoulder, bulging with supplies. For a brief, ridiculous moment, Lucas thought she looked like she belonged here, like she had simply come home after a long day. "Hi," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Hi," Lucas answered, stepping aside to let her in. Noah immediately reached for her hand, pulling her into the house with an enthusiasm that made Lucas's throat tighten. Ruby laughed and knelt down to Noah's level, digging into her bag and pulling out a small whiteboard and a handful of colorful markers. "I thought we could start with something simple," she said, setting her things down on the coffee table. Noah sat cross-legged on the rug, watching her with wide, eager eyes. Lucas hung back by the kitchen, feeling strangely like an outsider in his own home. He didn't know how to insert himself into what was unfolding between them without breaking it somehow. Ruby drew a smiley face on the whiteboard and signed the word happy, then said it aloud. Noah mimicked the sign, then picked up a marker, himself, and began to draw, tentative at first, but gaining confidence with each stroke. Lucas watched, astonished, as his son crafted a lopsided sun with rays stretching out in every direction. "Sun," Ruby said, signing the word and encouraging Noah to repeat it. He did, fumbling but determined. Lucas leaned against the doorway, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, willing himself not to interrupt, not to overwhelm what was happening right in front of him. He wasn't needed here. And that thought, sharp and unrelenting, cut deeper than he expected. For so long it had been just the two of them. Lucas and Noah against the world. Lucas had fought every battle, filled every silence, carried every burden. And now, here was this woman, stepping into their lives with easy grace, opening doors Lucas hadn't even known were locked. Ruby turned to him at one point, smiling. "Would you like to join us?" she asked. Lucas hesitated, the instinct to retreat, to stay safely behind his walls, warring with the longing to be part of this fragile, extraordinary moment. He crossed the room and sank down onto the rug beside Noah, feeling awkward and too large for the space. Ruby handed him a marker without ceremony. "Draw your favorite place," she said simply. Lucas blinked at the whiteboard, feeling foolish, but Noah was watching him with an expression of pure trust, so Lucas bent his head and began to draw. His lines were clumsy but recognizable. A rough sketch of their backyard, the oak tree at the center, the battered swing set he had assembled years ago with trembling hands and too much hope. Noah lit up, clapping his hands and pointing excitedly at the drawing. "Home," Ruby said gently, signing the word as she spoke. Lucas's throat tightened unbearably. Home. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, but it was theirs. Noah took the whiteboard and with great concentration added himself beneath the oak tree, a stick figure with wild lines for arms. Then beside him he added another figure, smaller, rounder, hair sticking out at impossible angles. Ruby. Lucas felt the breath leave his body in one slow exhale. He looked at Ruby, who was smiling, though her eyes shimmered suspiciously in the soft afternoon light. She wasn't trying to replace him. She wasn't pulling Noah away. She was simply expanding their world, making room for more, for hope, for joy, for family. They spent the next hour playing, drawing, signing simple words. Lucas followed Ruby's lead, sometimes clumsily, but with growing confidence. Noah responded, eagerly, thrilled to have two people who spoke his language, however imperfectly. When Ruby finally packed up her things, promising to come back in 2 days, Noah clung to her hand, reluctant to let go. "You're doing amazing, buddy," she told him, kneeling to meet his eyes. "I'll see you soon." Noah nodded solemnly, then leaned forward and pressed a kiss to her cheek. Ruby's eyes widened in surprise, and then her face crumpled with emotion. Lucas cleared his throat, feeling his own eyes burn. After Ruby left, the house felt strangely different. Still quiet, but no longer heavy. Lucas watched Noah return to his blocks, humming a soft, tuneless song under his breath, for the first time. In what felt like forever, Lucas allowed himself to hope, really hope, that things could get better, that the walls around them didn't have to be prisons, that maybe, just maybe, love could find its way back into their broken world. Later, as Lucas tucked Noah into bed, he found a new drawing clutched in the boy's hand. 3 stick figures stood beneath a bright, smiling sun, Lucas, Noah, and Ruby, all holding hands. Lucas kissed his son's forehead and sat in the dark long after Noah drifted off to sleep, staring at the drawing, feeling its fragile, beautiful promise settle into his heart like a prayer. He hadn't dared to imagine this kind of happiness for a long time. But tonight, beneath the worn ceiling of their imperfect home, Lucas Harrington finally believed that miracles, the real ones, didn't come in flashes of light or grand gestures. They came quietly, through small hands reaching out, through patient smiles, through the bravery of ordinary hearts daring to love again. And for the first time in years, Lucas was ready to follow where that hope led, wherever it took them. The weeks that followed unfolded like a miracle, so gradual and so fragile that Lucas Harrington barely dared to acknowledge it. Twice a week, Ruby arrived at their door, her canvas bag of supplies slung over one shoulder, her smile steady and sure. And twice a week, Noah opened a little more, like a flower reaching for the sun. Lucas watched it happen with a mixture of awe and helpless gratitude. He had spent so long believing he and Noah were enough, just the two of them against the world, that he hadn't realized how small their world had become. Ruby didn't replace anything. She expanded it. She stretched it wider and filled it with laughter, small victories, and moments that felt like breathing after years underwater. One afternoon, Lucas stood by the window, arms crossed, pretending to read a report from his company as he watched Ruby and Noah work together on the living room floor. Ruby had created a game where they paired words with actions: clap, jump, dance. Noah was giggling uncontrollably, his hands clumsy, but eager, his voice emerging in small, precious bursts of sound. Lucas should have felt overjoyed, Instead, a knot of something sharp and unfamiliar tightened inside him. Fear. He wasn't the one Noah looked at with shining eyes. He wasn't. The one making him laugh. Lucas told himself it didn't matter. What mattered was Noah's happiness, his growth, his chance to connect with a world that had always felt so distant. Still, a seed of insecurity took root, and it festered quietly in the background. It didn't take long for that seed to grow. Julia, Lucas's older sister, came over one afternoon, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor, her polished presence feeling jarringly out of place in the soft, messy home Lucas and Noah had built with Ruby's help. She sat at the kitchen, island, stirring her coffee and watching Ruby and Noah from a distance. "You're letting a waitress teach your son?" Julia asked, her voice low but cutting. Lucas bristled. "She's helping him." Julia set her cup down with a sharp clink. "You barely know her. What do you really know about her past? Her motives? People aren't saints, Lucas. Especially when money's involved." Lucas gritted his teeth. "It's not like that." Julia raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "You're a millionaire single dad with a vulnerable son. That kind of story attracts attention. The wrong kind. You need to be smart." He said nothing, but Julia's words burrowed into the cracks of his fears. 2 days later, Julia sent an email. No subject line, no greeting. Just a single audio file attached. Lucas sat at his desk, the cursor hovering over the play button for a long time before he finally clicked. At first, the background noise of clinking dishes and soft diner chatter filled his ears. Then he heard it. Ruby's voice. She was laughing light and easy. "He's rich," another voice teased. Ruby laughed again, softer this time. "Yeah, maybe I won't have to worry about rent for a while." The words hit Lucas like a punch to the gut. He sat frozen, the blood draining from his face. Every instinct screamed denial, but the evidence played again and again, each repetition slicing deeper. Had it all been a lie? The gentle smiles? The patient lessons? The way she looked at Noah as if he was a miracle instead of a burden? Lucas didn't know what to believe anymore. When Ruby showed up for her next session, Noah squealed with excitement, racing to the door. Lucas stayed rooted in place, his heart pounding with something that felt sickeningly like betrayal. Ruby's smile faltered the moment she saw his face. "We need to talk," Lucas said stiffly. Ruby set her bag down carefully. "Okay," she said, wary. Lucas pulled out his phone, hit play, and let the recording fill the room. Ruby paled, her hand flying to her mouth. When it ended, silence crashed over. "Them. Where did you get that?" she whispered. "Does it matter?" Lucas snapped, harsher than he intended. "Was any of it real?" Ruby shook her head, tears welling. "Lucas, it's not what you think, please." "Noah trusted you," Lucas cut in, his voice rough with pain. "I trusted you, and you made a fool out of both of us." Noah tugged on Ruby's sleeve, sensing the tension but not understanding. He whimpered softly, confusion clouding his bright eyes. Ruby dropped to her knees beside him, her voice shaking. "You're so brave, little one," she whispered, brushing a hand through his hair. "Never forget that." She stood slowly, her body trembling. She looked at Lucas one last time, heartbreak etched deep into her features. "I thought you were different," she said, her voice barely more than a breath. Then she was gone, the door swinging shut behind her with a hollow finality. The house felt cavernous after she left. Noah sat by the window for hours, staring out into the empty driveway, clutching the worn napkin drawing of the three of them he had made weeks ago. Lucas tried to talk to him, tried to coax him into a game, a smile, anything. But Noah had retreated, behind walls even thicker than before. The light in his eyes dimmed, and Lucas knew with a sick certainty, that it wasn't the world that had hurt his son this time. It was him. Days blurred together in a grey haze. The house grew colder, quieter. Noah no longer reached for his picture cards. He no longer pointed out colors or tried to sign new words. He simply existed, moving through the days like a ghost. Lucas sat up late at night, the house creaking around him, haunted by the sound of his own mistakes. He thought he had been protecting Noah, shielding him from harm. But in truth, he had built the very prison he was trying to keep him safe from. One evening, as rain misted against the windows, Lucas found Noah asleep in the armchair by the door, clutching the crumpled drawing like a lifeline. Lucas dropped to his knees beside him, stroking his son's hair with a hand that shook. "I'm sorry, buddy," he whispered brokenly. "I'm so sorry." He didn't know how to fix this. He only knew he had to try. Somewhere out there, Ruby was carrying her own broken pieces, pieces he had shattered with his fear, his pride, his failure, to listen. And if there was even the smallest chance that she would hear him now, that she would let him explain. Lucas knew he would chase that chance across every dusty mile of Arizona if he had to, because sometimes the hardest battles weren't against the world. They were against yourself, and Lucas Harrington was finally ready to fight for what truly mattered. The morning broke grey and uncertain, a misty veil hanging over Sedona's scarlet cliffs. Lucas Harrington strapped Noah into the back seat of the SUV, the boy's small hands clutching the crumpled drawing that had never left his side. Lucas had no plan, no destination, only the aching certainty that he couldn't stay where he was, not after what he had done, not with the silent, steady grief in Noah's eyes gnawing away at him. He drove without direction, the road unspooling, in endless grey ribbons. He stopped at diners, coffee shops, motels, places Ruby might have fled to, each time flashing a picture of her and asking the same desperate question. Sometimes he found someone who remembered a woman with a sad smile and a gentle touch. Always they shook their heads when he asked where she had gone. Noah sat quietly through it all, watching from the back seat, saying nothing but clutching the drawing tighter every time Lucas's hope faltered. They crossed into Camp Verde by late afternoon, the small town sleeping under a sky heavy with rain. Lucas's shoulders sagged, the weight of guilt and failure anchoring him to the earth. As he turned down the main street, he caught a flash of color through the mist. A hand-painted sign swinging above a low building that read Hope Circle, free art classes for special needs kids. His heart thudded painfully. He pulled over, heart in his throat, and lifted Noah from the car. The boy tucked his head against Lucas's chest as they walked toward the warm light spilling from the open door. Inside, children's laughter rang out, pure and bright. Tables were strewn with finger paints, construction paper, glitter. Parents leaned against the walls, chatting quietly, grateful for a place where their children could simply be. And there, kneeling beside a boy struggling to glue colored shapes onto a board, was Ruby Martin. Lucas stood frozen, the world narrowing to a single point of clarity. Ruby hadn't run to escape. She had run to keep doing what she loved, what she believed in. She hadn't been chasing opportunity or money. She had been chasing hope. Noah spotted her first. With a sudden cry, clear, sure, and full of desperate longing, he wriggled free from Lucas's arms and ran. Ruby looked up at the sound, her face softening into astonishment as Noah barreled into her arms. Home, he said, the word small but unmistakable. Ruby's breath hitched. She dropped the glue stick, wrapping Noah in a fierce, trembling hug as tears slipped down her cheeks. Around them, conversations quieted, parents and children alike sensing the magnitude of the moment unfolding. Lucas moved toward them, each step heavy with everything he needed to say, everything he needed to fix. When Ruby finally looked up, their eyes met across the crowded room. No words passed between them. They weren't needed. Everything was laid bare, the mistakes, the regrets, the desperate, aching hope. After the session ended and the last child was bundled away into the misty evening, Ruby stepped onto the porch. Off the center, her arms crossed against the chill, Noah leaning against her side. Lucas approached, his heart in his mouth. I was wrong, he said, voice low and ragged. About you. About everything. Ruby said nothing, her gaze wary but not closed. Lucas swallowed hard. I let my fear blind me. I let pride wreck the best thing that had ever happened to Noah. He paused, gathering every shred of courage he had. And to me. Still she said nothing. She only watched, letting him feel the weight of his own confession. I don't deserve forgiveness, Lucas said, his voice cracking. But I had to try. Noah tugged at Ruby's sleeve, holding up the crumpled drawing he'd carried through every mile they had traveled. 3 figures under a smiling sun. Family. Ruby blinked, the edges of her control fraying. I never cared about the money, she said, at last her voice trembling. I cared about him. About both of you. Lucas stepped closer, the rain beginning to fall again, soft and cold. I know that now, he said. I know it too late. But if there's even the smallest chance you could forgive me, I'll spend the rest of my life proving it. For a long, shattering moment, Ruby said nothing. Then she knelt, gathering Noah and the drawing and the broken pieces of herself back into her arms. She stood slowly and met Lucas's gaze. One step at a time, she whispered. He nodded, his throat too tight for words. The following weeks were a slow rebuild of trust, of laughter cautiously blooming again, of Noah's world stitching itself back together one precious afternoon at a time. Lucas worked side by side with Ruby at Hope Circle, sanding benches, painting murals, teaching himself to listen instead of fix, to stay instead of run. He learned to speak the language of small victories. A high five, a shy smile, a whispered word from Noah when no one was pushing him. He learned to love without conditions. Months passed. Spring warmed the desert, coaxing wildflowers from the stubborn earth. And under the sprawling branches of a cottonwood tree by the river, with Noah clutching a basket of dandelions and paint-smeared children clapping around them, Lucas dropped to one knee. He didn't have a ring. Not yet. Only a heart full of love and a hand extended in hope. "Marry me," he said simply. "Not because it's perfect. Not because it's easy. But because you're home." Ruby laughed, breathless, and sank to her knees before him. "Yes," she whispered. And when Lucas gathered her into his arms, Noah threw dandelions into the air with pure, unfiltered joy. Later, they sat on the porch of the small ranch house they now called home, Ruby leaning against Lucas's chest, Noah drowsing between them. The stars blinked overhead, vast and eternal. Lucas closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of honeysuckle and dust and promise. Home, he thought, not a place, not a possession, a feeling, a choice. And in the circle of arms wrapped around him, in the steady heartbeat against his side, Lucas Harrington knew with a certainty that nothing could ever shake. They had found their way back to each other, and they would never be lost again. Family is not about perfection. It is about love. It is about standing together through the storms, healing the broken places, and building a home from laughter, forgiveness, and second chances. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful journey of healing, trust, and unconditional love. If stories like this touch your heart and remind you of the resilience we all carry within, we invite you to subscribe to Fortune's Wrath. Here we share tales that inspire, heal, and celebrate the extraordinary power of human connection. Stay with us for more real emotional stories that speak to the soul. Until next time, may you always believe in the beauty of second chances.